From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
G'day, mate. Well, what a difference a year makes. Remember when old mate Albanese, every time he was flying off overseas, which was quite a lot, would never answer a question about anything domestic. He would literally try to palm it away and pretend that good news, bad news, whatever, he could not answer. There was some magical reason why he couldn't answer a question about anything to do with Australian politics when he was overseas.
I make it a policy. I said this on my first visit. I intend to stick to it, that I won't be commenting on domestic issues while overseas. I'm not commenting on domestic issues while I'm overseas.
Well, Airbus Albo is overseas again. This time he's in Papua New Guinea, where he will be walking the Kokoda track with the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, no doubt discussing money that's coming their way when it comes to a rugby league team and a whole bunch of other soft diplomacy keeping out China. But it's yet another overseas trip. So does the rule apply anymore? Well, no. He gave interviews across the television spectrum this morning, live from Port Moresby, where he was more than willing to talk about domestic issues because, of course, his vote is down by 12%, according to the latest polls.
It just shows his arrogance. This is an egotist, totally out of touch. He clearly sees this as a vanity project for himself.
If only I had a name for this bloke who has it both ways, who says he has a policy of doing one thing and then ends up doing exactly the opposite. Oh, that's right. What was it? What was it again? Ah, there. Here we go. And what a difference 3 years makes. Petrol record highs all around the country, no matter where you were. I was twisting the dial and having a listen to a whole bunch of talkback stations today. People blowing up. Deluxe. Prices were a lot higher than this in big parts of most of the cities, but still way over $2, almost $2.30 as the average in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. Now, what was it that Anthony Albanese was saying back when it was $1.85?
They haven't done anything about petrol. We'll await to see what they do with regard to petrol.
He wanted a cut in petrol excise. But now that he's the Prime Minister and he increased petrol taxes, what's he saying about petrol prices that are now way past $2, that we're closer to $2.50 than we are $2, let alone $1.85? Oh, that's right. Nothing. Now, of course, the media would be just as invested, wouldn't they, in making sure that the little people get a little bit back when it comes to petrol? Because remember, what did they used to write about cost of living when it was the previous government? Well, of course, the former Channel 10 and far left-wing guy, Paul Bongiorno, everything's going up except Morrison's chances. Cost of living really matters, really matters. It's all worse now. But does he write about it anymore? Of course not. Samantha Maiden in news.com.au was part of the narrative that Aussies are paying $30 a tank in petrol taxes, but the Prem yet to drop excise. I didn't notice anything she filed today on petrol taxes that are higher and way higher than $30 that people are paying a tank now when it comes to petrol excise. And as for the rest of the media that cared about petrol prices so much so that it became such a long, loud issue that if the government didn't do something, they had to lose it. But now it doesn't matter. Prices are way higher. The financial pressure way tighter. But in the same way, the Prime Minister's policy is to not discuss matters overseas. When the political fortunes change, guess what? So do the hard and fast rules. One of the reasons I always talk about cost of living, and always at the start of the show, is if that was the reason why things desperately had to change a couple of years ago, well, isn't that the standard by which we judge this mob? Oh, no, that's right. That would only be us trying to maintain the standard. Otherwise, it just was the crowbar that they could get rid of the bloke they didn't like. And as for the person that they do like, well, nothing to see here, despite the fact it's all worse and you pay more. Now, unlike you, where so many days you're just confused a little bit by the news, and sometimes the things that are now just taken for granted as absolute fact and you can't possibly disagree with them become a little bit confusing, like a person who identifies as a bird, for instance.
So Avery and I are both birds. I am a cardinal and Avery is a blue jay. And being birds, while we do have our own gender expression, we don't inherently have a gender at all.
And every time there's a conversation about Australia, of course, we don't celebrate Australia. We have to find ways to say that it has at its very heart an endless racism and a history that is not worth remembering one day after a ship bumped into the country.
Thank you. And this is my workplace, may I remind everybody, and to be white-splained by a white woman is inappropriate and it's borderline racism. So I expect, whilst I'm in this place, that I am not racially vilified or white-splained by white people on my own country. After all, you all benefit from being on stolen land.
And the same person constantly tells us that despite the fact she can rant on like this, and we're all supposedly post-race where we judge each other by the content of their character, but more importantly, just the quality of the human being that they are, that apparently you can be racist just only to white people.
You have to understand what racism is. Yeah. And racism is about a race. Now, white people don't fall into that category. So we cannot be racist to white people.
I'm just as exhausted as you are. Just illogical garbage. Up is down, down is up, black is white, forward is back, no rules. And then there are, of course, the people who say that things like mathematics apparently is deeply racist, and if you dare defend 1 + 1, you are one of the unchosen.
Humans have then used math and numbers and statistics in all sorts of ways, from counting black and brown bodies as they made them property and brought them over to these lands, to much more recently, scholars who said that white people were more intelligent than people of color. That's called scientific racism, the use of statistics and tools to construct the idea.
Shut up! Oh, we get it that history is complicated, at times bloody, at times embarrassing, at times awful. No question about it. But the idea that all of the building blocks that have brought us to this point in time, where you can hold in your hand a device that will give you a video call for free to family on the other side of the world, is all without merit, without discovery, without celebration, without acceptance. Everything has something wrong with it. Now, one of the ways and one of the reasons why this has escalated in the terms that it has over recent years is that more lunatics than ever before have had a platform. And when lots of loons get together, it all starts to feel like they're all attacking you. There's this great picture that was in the Wall Street Journal about somebody who was the recipient of an absolute pile-on of the internet. And these are all the Twitter birds, and just like the famous Alfred Hitchcock film, where all of the black crows are bang, 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 attacking you. Sometimes it feels like that when basically all the loons get together and decide, let's take over the asylum. So anyone who speaks up automatically gets yelled at you. And then a way of making sure that politicians don't dare agree with the obvious logic of up is down, there is black and white, there is left and right, there is right and wrong. What these groups often do is like a giant Voltron character, cartoon from the 80s. They all get together in their separate parts to form one giant machine of hate. They grab their pitchforks and they light their torches and they head towards any company that would dare support the logic that existed in the country 2 years ago. Best exemplified by the Simpsons movie.
Look, those idiots don't even know where we live.
And because they all want to avoid those people, the companies that used to attach themselves to national days like Australia Day now all run for cover. In fact, the whole way, and we have this chat every goddamn year about whether Australia should have a national day, and are you allowed to celebrate a country that's got so much blood in its history books, and is it, blah, 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 you all the time. And literally, there is now more media focus on January 26 on the protests about the existence and the want to redefine the concept of a national day than there actually is for those who wish to celebrate a harmonious country. A harmonious country where we have elections that can be spirited but there is no violence. Where, generally speaking, people of extremely separate faiths or beliefs do not attack each other. And when they do, we have what we had last week, national outrage that a line had been crossed. Now, again, I understand that the more we learn about our past, it helps inform our future. And there's no part of me that's ever viewed things like Australia Day as some sort of white pride rally. And I completely understand why that particular date causes some of the emotions that it does. But that's why I've suggested where Noel Pearson has been is the right place, which is do something on the 25th and then do something on the 26th. Or why not on another day of your choosing? We could take, I don't know, the Queen's birthday long weekend, which no one has an emotional contact to, and make it Mabo Day, right? And celebrate Indigenous achievement. But instead, there are the people who, in order to pull down every single thing that they don't like that exists today, they have to salt the earth to make sure nothing else will grow up in its place. Nothing that is unapproved. And of course, if you wake up every day and you turn your radio on, what's the news today? What? Or you check out online or see something here on the telly and you just go, when did this happen? When did we have a national vote for this nonsense? Sure, to be heard, and it used to be heard. But now, as soon as it is said, it is brought right into the centre of our national conversation, and we all have to pretend that the lady who identifies like a bird, nothing weird about it whatsoever. Another way that all of this takes place is because any time you push back and say, sorry, that's just crap. It's not true. It's not real. Let me have a nice, calm, no one's pulse raised conversation about why I think this National Day should be the way that it is, or the reason I think we should treat our kids like this, or in the same way that a kid can't get a tattoo, they probably shouldn't be able to go to a doctor and chop their bits. You get the point, right? It's sort of central to everything that just doesn't make sense anymore. But the reason that they're able to get away with it is because, firstly, sort of this nuttiness gets brought to the centre. We all pretend, oh, Jedi mind trick, what you can see with your own eyes you can't possibly see, let alone believe. And then if you decide to push back by writing a thing on Facebook, Happy Australia Day, all the birds start flying in on you. Because you're then accused of being part of a war and being the bad guys of the war that starts with the letter C.
Culture war.
Culture war.
Culture war. Culture war.
But all you're actually doing is saying, hang on, whoa. I don't agree with what you're saying. I've heard you. I've thought through your logic. I disagree. Now, as Australia, as a country, many times has been able to take big steps forward because we listen to the case, we understand it, we accept it, we move on. The same country that said no to the voice said yes to same-sex marriage. The same country that at one point in time used to say homosexuality is illegal, which of course was ridiculous, now is okay, and quite rightly so, with 2 men and 2 women being able to adopt a child and have a family. We live in a country where every state in the country, and the sky never fell in, produced legislation that if you are in a particular state of pain and you would like to end that journey earlier than your body will just give out, you can use a system to end your life. Now, you don't have to do it, I don't have to do it, but the option is now there for the people who want to do it. All little moves that you might agree or disagree with, but they're sort of big steps forward, right? So it's not like we're a country that just said, you know what, we aced 1923. So let's just keep living 1923 for the rest of our life. And remember, this garbage was around in the 90s, that if you were in any way pushing back against absurdity, you were white picket fence, 1950s, women stay in the all that rubbish. Well, all those people who used to make those arguments have now moved their way up through upper management, or they've slid their way up the political system, and many of them are now in positions where they turn around and tell you that your National Day is racist, that you must believe the lady who thinks that she's a bird, that everything is stolen and you must pay for it. Now again, having the position of just common sense does not mean that you are ignorant or aggressive to the complaints of the past, which have consequences, yes, today. But no, I'm not handing back the keys to the joint out of a sense of guilt. And when I say that, you can imagine what the reaction's going to be. Again, I'm completely aware of our history. Did you miss the bit where I talked about Mabo Day and the 25th of January? But I want to live in a world where I'll hand my version of the key to my kids who've got a whole bunch of different friends than I did, from lots of different cultural backgrounds, and they hang out with people and they are just as across what's happening in Vietnamese culture as they would be perhaps about what's happening in English culture. And that's a good thing. Cool. Okay, fine. That's their world. And as somebody once said to me, I'm not preparing my kids for my childhood, I'm preparing them for their childhood. So I get it, right? The beat moves on. But there's one thing that I'm not going to negotiate on, not going to fiddle with, not going to undermine, I'm not going to water down, and it's Anzac Day. Now, this is the National Day of commemoration for generations of people who lived a very different life than us. And I know that there's people watching us right now who've served quite recently or way back in their life, and to all of you, thank you for your service. It's not, again, a white pride day. It's not a victory over this, a victory over that. We don't do VJ Day anymore. But there's one day every year where we recognise the service of generations of people whose lives were changed forever. And we can go to things like the dawn service in your capital city and the big marches that take place in our major cities as well. But the truth is that for most of us, we'll end up going to the local RSL. I know that I'll be going to the RSL that was in part set up by my grandparents, and I'll be there with my dad, and I'll be there with my daughters, and I'll be there with the dearest of friends. Because I remember, apart from anything else, how important it was for my grandmother every year, the night before Anzac Day, to go to the memorial and to put like a little commemoration for her husband who had died decades earlier after serving his country. I recognise in Anzac Day that there were people who chose to go, there were people who were forced to go, but there are people who did a job that nobody in modern world would even think about doing. Like, think about a couple of weeks ago, right? In Bondi, you know, we all went nuts because a guy picked up a bollard, right? Compare that act of bravery to keeping your spirits up after spending years on the Western Front. Years fighting the Imperial Japanese, let alone decades in other places like Afghanistan and Iraq. And the reality is that for most people, they will go, well, for a lot of people, they're going to go to these suburban services and they're going to think of somebody who they knew. But let's not pretend that there aren't people who are trying to water the day down. And some of them are part of those nutty people who say, believe me, I'm a bird, everything's stolen, all the rest of it, right? But then there are the other people who just go, awesome. Anzac Day means sleep in, and then I'll see you at the pub in the afternoon and we'll play two up. And we'll pretend that that's our way of honouring the Anzacs. Now, unless they're stopping every couple of hours to hear the ode or to hear the last post or to stand in a minute's silence, then basically it's just an excuse to get on the cans and pretend that it's just part of being super Australian. But of course the day's not just about being super Australian. It's about a connection to current generations and the other generations in our history, because our history matters too, right? The history of people who had fought all around the world. But it's being watered down. It's watered down by the people at the pub. It's watered down by the intellectuals who write their little mini essays and say things like the story of us, how the inflated Anzac myth obscures our national identity. Screw you. The teachers you've heard about today who want to make it all about Palestine. Thank goodness it's school holidays in big chunks of the country and kids won't be exposed to this garbage. And then a conversation piece. The Anzac legend has been blinded Australia to its war atrocities. It's time for a reckoning. Screw you. Again, do we understand that war is complicated, horrible things happen, all of that stuff, right? But the idea that the person who you remember from your family, they don't get a moment in time, let alone their families and their suburbs and the country that we were. They don't get a minute's time. Well, bugger that, they're going to get more than a minute's time in a couple of days. So I need your help to make sure that we don't have eventually happen with Anzac Day what has happened to Australia Day. You need to turn up. You need to show your force in numbers. You need to tell your kids whether they like it or not, they're going. And if they can go with their grandparents, that'd be great. If they learn about their great-grandparents, that would also be awesome. Because people need to understand that we are all just a link in a chain that goes a long way that way, and fingers crossed goes a long way that way. And without any one of the links, it doesn't exist. But that is the continuum of time. So whether you have family members or not, you take the time to honour people who served in World War I, when Australia was a very, very long way away from the rest of the world. You take your time to honour people in World War II, because the Japanese wanted to take our country, and they actually bombed Darwin, and they actually got into Sydney Harbour. I want you to take the time to think of the people on the home front who stood up when the blokes were fighting, because that's the way it was back then, and they joined things like the Women's Land Army, and they kept our agricultural sector moving, or the women who worked in factories, the women who truly did it tough and did it first. Let's think about the people who served in Korea, the people who served in Vietnam, the people who served in the peacekeeping operations around the world, the people who served in Afghanistan, the people who served in Iraq. Because I know it's really easy to sit here and say, Anzac Day is really important, you know, let's push back on the left. No, no. Get up. You can go to the dawn service at 4 o'clock. You can go to the sunrise service at 7 o'clock. You can go to the one and the, whatever it is, right? But please make sure that you or someone you know takes time out of their day. Because I want the pictures on the news on 6 p.m's news on Anzac Day to show more people than last year. I want to see that when people try to fiddle around with this stuff, that, dare I say, you're part of the Australian who sends a letter, who picks up the phone. Because if we just sit back and say, OK, we get it, but everyone else doesn't, then it's going to go the way of Australia Day, OK? Where technically it'll exist, but the heart really isn't in it. That's our job as Australians. Australians of all backgrounds, recognising people of all different faiths and sexualities and races that have ended up serving our country. So I can sit here and we can talk together each and every night, and you can say what you want about your country. Now, I know that feels like a Year 7 debating point, but it's actually as real as the sun coming up. Something that more than 110,000 Australians never got to see again because they died. That's more people than there are in the MCG. And it's great that people will pause for a minute at the footy. But go out of your way, and I want to see more people than ever before. I want to see you take photos. I want to see you post it online. I want you to send the message to everyone you know this day matters. And we invite you to be part of it. Reach out, stand tall, because by goodness, we're worth it. You know it, I know it, and we talk about it each and every night. Now back to a few other things, including old mate Jim Chalmers. Oh, isn't he kind? Because despite the fact that there's all of these problems happening in the country right now, he does say, well, look, I know we're going to have a budget surplus, but if the surplus is big enough, I might throw 1 or 2 crumbs your way to deal with that, cost of living business.
We know that it's not mission accomplished because people are still hurting. And you can expect to see in the budget a focus on cost of living help. A tax cut for every taxpayer will be the centrepiece of the cost of living help in the budget. And if we can afford to do a little more than that, then those decisions will be taken in the next week or two.
But let's all say it together. How big is that tax cut? It's too little, it's too late, and it's $15 a week. Does this really feel like something that's going to change the world? And by the way, when he whinges and bitches and moans, I don't have enough money, guess what? According to the ABS and the budget papers, we had a look at this today, the Bureau of Statistics released just how much revenue the federal government has been getting in the past 3 full years of the budget cycles. Now, obviously, COVID was low, but geez, it's gone up, and it just shot through the roof in the first year of the Albanese government. Oh, but they're not at all high taxing. Their expectations, by the way, in a couple of years' time, even higher than that. So don't tell me there's no money going around, please. As the Herald Sun calculated today, the average Australian taxpayer is paying about $13,000 in income taxes last year. Many of you will say, sorry, that little? Let me tell you how they get to that number. The average Australian, 15 years and over, so we're assuming everyone's earning exactly the same money, right? All the way from 15 to 90. Paid $13,980 in Commonwealth income taxes over the 2023 year. This is up by $1,400, 12% in the past 12 months. It is double the rate of inflation. So not only was inflation making everything more expensive, the taxes that the federal government was getting was making things even more expensive. Now, of course, politicians, well, they're not really in it with us. They might talk a good game, but they know as long as they just, play along, don't rock the boat, they'll be fine because they got the biggest pay rise in a decade. And the people who work for the politicians in the public service, they got their biggest pay rise in a decade. And private companies are getting a slice of $1 billion from the taxpayer to help create a new green amazing future. But one of those companies, highlighted here, is owned by a billionaire. Why are they getting taxpayer money? And backed in by a multi-millionaire former Prime Minister. Why are they getting $1 of taxpayer money when thousands of Victorians earn a wage but have nowhere to live? New research from the Council of Homeless Persons revealed that 12,146 wage earners across the state of Victoria sought homelessness assistance in 2023. Everyone paying attention? 12,000. Yet this bloke in Canberra, if I can squeeze it, I'll give you something. But I've definitely got money for the company run by a multi-millionaire former Prime Minister and owned by a freaking billionaire. Think about what the Prime Minister was talking about today when it came to Elon Musk. Oh, that arrogant, evil billionaire. Oh, we'll play class warfare when it comes to the stuff we disagree. Otherwise, we'll shovel money that comes from people who are not only paying more for everything, but more tax on top of it than ever before. Oh, but you couldn't possibly cut petrol taxes. You couldn't possibly commit to an energy system and slower transition that means, for goodness sake, power bills don't explode. Oh no, of course, because you've got to feel good. Because you're going to use more of those taxpayer dollars to host a UN climate conference. Remember, that was one of their dreams. I get angry not because it's the politicians that I disagree with, not because it's not the people who I voted for. I get so pissed off because they claim to be something else. And when somebody claims to be something else but turns out to be just as bad as everyone who's ever done it before, yet the media, who call out every little thing with the people they don't like but give a complete free pass to the people they do like, you start to feel like the system's rigged. You start to feel like the system couldn't care less about anyone outside the bubble. Now, I get it. I'm not digging ditches. I've got a TV show. This is the greatest job I will ever have, and fingers crossed will have it as long as I possibly can. But like you, I come from normal stock that doesn't think people identify as birds, and understands that Australia Day is not a white pride festival, and understands that Anzac Day is not some sort of mythical celebration of war criminals. That's happy to have a top tax rate of 48 cents in the dollar if the people with nothing are being taken care of. But what was that number again? 12,000 people in one state, 70% of them women, have a job but are also seeking homelessness assistance. Yet these flogs in Canberra and the people who suck up to them never call them out. And the Treasurer will say, oh, how good am I? Surplus. Seriously? Let's judge our country by the people we don't help. Let's judge our country by the people we choose to help. Let's judge our country as being one that is strong and free enough to have pride in its own existence. Plenty more tonight. Can you know what you think? paul@skynews.com.au is the email. Nigel Farage in a moment or two's time, and a stoking debate. We're in one of those moods tonight. Going to cause a bit of trouble, going to annoy a few people, and I couldn't be happier. Well, I've taken my chill pill and we're okay now, but there's plenty to talk about here with Joe Hildebrand and Nicole Flynn. But you know those moments.
I like the passionate.
You know, you get those moments. All right, thank you. All right, let's talk about this here. In Queensland, there was an interesting take, which is coming up from the Katter Party. They're suggesting people should be able to use lethal force to be able to push people back who enter their own homes. We spoke last night in detail about the crime statistics, including thousands of people under the age of 17 who've been done for unlawful entry. But on top of all of that, it was interesting to note in the freshwater polling that is done in the Australian Financial Review, in terms of the please rank the number one issue, things like crime are now starting to tick their way up and starting to move past things like climate change as the priorities for the country. Nicole, the next federal election will not be fought about crime, but it is an interesting reminder that when people feel unsafe in their homes, then they start to reflect that in the polls. And I think when you become financially unsafe as well, then that too will start to reflect in the polls. What do you think?
Yes, Paul, I totally agree with you. I just don't know that we need to go down the path suggested by the Katter Australia Party, though, on this. Yes. You don't want any unintended consequences occurring, that's for sure. If we're encouraging everyone to sit at home in their homes thinking, right, if someone comes through the door, I'm going to use lethal force, or I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm going to use lethal force. What if the person coming through the door is a family member? You know, what if it's one of your kids who's snuck out to go out, you know, with their mates when they're not supposed to be? What does changing people's mindset do that could end in some really tragic unintended consequences? What I would much prefer to see is that we have far tougher penalties for these offenders, especially these juvenile offenders that seem to be the biggest category at the moment, and that we properly resource are police, are incredibly hardworking policemen and policewomen who put their lives on the line to keep people safe. But you've got to back up their work with proper penalties. I mean, how many times do we see terrible crimes committed and we all sit here thinking that penalty is just not enough? It's not enough to deter the broader, criminal element of society, and it's certainly not enough to deter the criminals themselves.
Well, let alone an awful situation playing out in New South Wales right now because somebody's charged. I'm limited in what I can say here, but how a person was let out on bail and then murders take place. I mean, again, the system at so many levels is really screwed up. I want to talk about censoring the internet with you, though, John.
Yes.
So the Prime Minister broke his sacred and long-held view that he should not discuss domestic matters while overseas and decided to lay it in.
He did it for the diggers, Paul. He did it for the diggers. He was out there, he was on Kokoda track. Suddenly he just got a wave of patriotic nationalism swept over him and he said, you know what I'm going to talk about today, kids? Australia.
Yeah. Looks like he
God
was
love him for
Looks
it.
like he was at a marina. He hasn't got a boot dirty till
He's getting there. He's getting there.
But okay.
Come on.
So,
Yes.
you and I are absolutists when it comes to free speech.
Yep.
You're not supposed to say but or then after that.
Yeah, no, well, I was about to say the same thing.
But we both have
That's
the
right.
big but, which is, obviously, I think that the videos that are the commissioning of a crime shouldn't be online and as best removed they can be. Now, as some people will quite correctly point out, including Andrew Bolt, is very good in this when he's turning around saying, well, where do you draw the line? Cool, I'm happy to have the chat about where we draw the line. But the idea that the only place you can find weird stuff on the internet is bad Twitter because Musk owns it.
Yeah.
Are we aware of TikTok?
Yeah, I think this is a classic case of a couple of things. Firstly, for me, the line is very, very clear, and I think it's pretty simple to understand. As long as your free speech is not actually inciting others to commit violence against another person, then I reckon it's pretty much okay. It's hard to think of an example where it wouldn't be. You can be wrong. You can think injecting bleach is a great idea to cure yourself of COVID. You can think that vaccines are harmful to you and be wrong 1 minute and then suddenly right the next. So again, that's why you've got to make sure that all these things are aired. And of course, if you're not airing these things, it just makes the people who believe the wrong thing even more convinced that they're right. So it's counterproductive on top of everything else. But that does not apply to terrorism. Yes. That does not apply to beheading videos where people are clearly getting radicalised by that, including, it appears, the alleged attacker of the Church of Christ the Shepherd in Wakeley. So, if it is causing violence, if you are saying all Jews should be killed, or all Muslims should be killed, the Christchurch massacre. I mean, he live streamed that. Was he breaking the law by live streaming it, or just by killing 50 people in a mosque?
But also, we know
that's Musk's kind of argument.
Yeah,
that's Musk's kind of argument.
But we also know that the technology that exists now is that if you upload a video and you had Taylor Swift music underneath it, it'd be able to detect the music and bang, your video's not allowed to go up, right? So the capacity for the internet to be able to stop what gets on there before it gets on.
I don't think you can stop it, but it's a matter of reasonably complying. So Meta, obviously scarred by the Christchurch stuff, said, yes, we'll take it down. And Twitter, when it was asked to take down the Wakeley attack, said, no, this is a free speech thing. And the reason it, quite frankly, pisses me off, I just exercise a bit of free speech there, is because I think there are genuine concerns about whatever may or may not be in this Misinformation or Disinformation Act. But if this is the hill that the internet is going to die on, so no, we must have the right to show terror attacks, then that debate is won and lost already without having started.
Yeah, but the chat that I've been trying to have here for a long time, and I'm pleased to be joined by many saying the same thing now, right, Nicole, is that I don't want the video conversation to be the Trojan horse for the real thing that the government was trying to do 6 months before Bondi, 6 months before the church, which was to turn around and to say that social media companies would be directly fined if misinformation is found to be on their platform and ruled as such by the government. What that would mean is that, slowly but surely, not that hard to work out who, certain organisations would just not be able to post on the service because it's just a too hard basket, which means lawfare means a whole section of people won't be able to hear people pushing back on government narrative.
Yes, exactly, Paul. Misinformation, that's where it absolutely falls into the censorship category, because we know what will happen. People with certain political views, which is anyone on the centre-right of politics, will be the ones being censored because big tech don't like our views. I think Joe has just expressed how we solve this quite beautifully. I think we can. I think we can work out what is, as Joe said, going to incite violence or is displaying incidents of terrorism. And as I'm sure all the viewers at home know, I'm very outspoken on the sort of abuse, and it is abuse, and the sexualised threats that women in public life put up with all the time. I did. People like Lee Sales have, Lisa Miller, so many women. It can be stopped. It should be stopped because it's actual abuse, and quite often it is threats of sexual assault that if you said it in public, you would be arrested by the police, quite rightly. So we can find what is the right line here, and we should, and big tech must be held to account. Sky News doesn't broadcast this sort of stuff. You know, the newspapers pixelate things out if they want to show pictures. You know, we've just seen this with the Bondi Junction tragedy. There are ways to communicate the news without broadcasting the illegal acts themselves.
I'm with you. Sorry, guys, I got too long-winded today, so I'll make sure you have more time next week, but I felt it, so...
We went for quality over quantity this time.
That's why we love
just
you.
For you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Joe. Thank you very soon. Speaking of, none other than great Nigel Farage joins us next. Now, I've spent plenty of time, like he has, actually listening to what's going on inside this Donald Trump trial. This is red hot. This is red hot. We'll talk about it in a sec. Our great mate Nigel Farage, we talk to him each and every Tuesday night. He's in London. We've got a bit more time to talk than usual, which I'm very pleased to do because we've got some detail here we've got to get through about this Trump trial and what's playing out in New York now. The idea that he could go to jail for not the payments but the accounting of payments seems to me to be such a low piece of hanging fruit to go after a former president. But it's not just that. It's about forcing him to sit there every day. It's about analysing his every movement. It's about the psychological warfare of him having to watch every single thing he does, knowing that that goes out into the court of public opinion. What did you think of opening arguments?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a character assassination, isn't it? And you're quite right. He's got to sit there through this for, 6 whole weeks, which is agony. And he, notoriously, like all entrepreneurs, he wants to one side of A4, make a decision, move on. So it's going to be very tough. They've even stopped him going to his own son's graduation, which struck me as being pretty mean. The opening arguments are that a couple of women were paid off using Trump Organization money, to which I have to say, so what? That isn't a crime. It's an accounting misdemeanor. So why is this in court? Well, the argument goes that the misdemeanor impacted upon the general election that took place in 2016, and therefore, if one act affects another, that then becomes a crime. I tell you what, Paul, it's a stretch. I mean, in terms of a legal argument, it is a real stretch. Now, clearly, he will be asked the question, did he know these payments were being made? Were they made on his behalf by an accountant? There is no way he goes to prison over this. No way whatsoever. Quite where they managed to find a jury of 12 in New York City who had neutral opinions about Donald Trump, I don't know for the life of me. He'll probably finish up with a fine of some kind, but it is the 6 weeks out of the election campaign, the 6 weeks, as you mentioned in the introduction, of every micro movement that he makes being analysed in the press. It is a horrendous, humiliating thing to put a former president through, but that's where America's got to. It is a fully politicised judiciary, very badly in need of reform.
But also, I'm trying to think of, there are plenty of high-profile cases that come and go, right? But I'm really trying to think about the types of cases that normally result in this sort of absolute minutiae of the defendant and what they're doing. Now, of course, the defendant really doesn't play the role in the trial because unless they choose to take to the stand, it's all happening around them. And it's sort of frankly, serial killer level stuff where they turn around as if this is, the person who's been hiding for 20 years and the trail of bodies that are, like that, but because that's the level of derangement that has built up around this bloke, right? Which is, it's one thing to say, okay, I disagree with his policies, I find his rhetoric, I don't like that, all of that stuff. But for these people, they have really built him up to a figure of that's so odious that you would cover it like it was a serial killer.
Yes, I mean, you'd have thought this was sort of crime of the century that he's committed. I am convinced that my reaction to it, which is a shrug of the shoulders and a so what, I'm convinced that is where most of middle America will be. I don't think, whatever the outcome of these proceedings at the end of 6 weeks, will make any difference or do any damage to his electoral prospects whatsoever. Unless he was to crack in some way under the strain and get up in the court and explode or do something like that, which of course is what they'll try and do.
Yes.
They will be attempting to provoke him the whole time. So he just has to keep his composure and get through the agony of the next few weeks. And I'm very confident that he will. And I've been with him a couple of times this year already. I have to say, he is as mentally fit, if not more so, than he was way back in 2016. He will come through this.
Yeah, I also think one of the things with all of this obsessive conversation about the physicality is that if he turns around and says, "Oh, the reason I fell asleep is because I have sleep apnea," see, he's as bad as Joe Biden. If the reason he wiggled in his seat was because, "Oh, my back's a bit sore," see, he's as addled as Joe Biden, and then that issue gets. So I think that's part of the nexus here too. Let's talk about the Rwanda bill slowly moving up and down in the UK Parliament. I was almost going to use exactly the same thing that came to your mind of what the metaphor was about a young bride, but anyway, let's get to the idea here of whether the legislation's going to stand. Rishi Sunak is out and about, running about and saying, "Stop the boats, stop the boats." What happens in the end here? Meantime, 5 people have died trying to get into the country via the channel.
Yeah, 5 people died this morning. That takes it to 14 this year that have drowned in the English Channel. That number will go up. There's a couple of hundred on their way to us literally as we speak, being escorted, would you believe, by the French Navy. I mean, the French Navy are doing the job of the traffickers for them. It's quite extraordinary. Rishi's passed this piece of legislation, but it's not going to work. And it won't work because we signed up in the early 1950s to the European Convention on Human Rights. It was an agreement intended to stop what happened to the Jews in Austria and Germany in the 1930s and led to the Holocaust. And of its time, it seemed like a good idea. But Mr. Blair incorporated that into British law via something called the Human Rights Act. And as soon as people are about to be put on a plane and sent to Rwanda, what will happen is that piece of UK legislation will be used, brought to British judges. I doubt anyone will go to Rwanda. Some may go, but it won't be in big enough numbers to stop the flood that's coming. And all of this has been brought to a head because I raised this 4 years ago. I was the one going out in the English Channel filming this when mainstream media literally wouldn't talk about it. And now Rishi Sunak is basing the whole general election on his Rwanda policy. He's promised within 10 to 12 weeks that the planes will fly, which makes me now think that our general election will not be in October or November as predicted. I think it's coming at the end of June or early July. It's his only way out.
Yeah, interesting to say. Well, you're always right about these things, so we will follow you certainly on the policy and we'll find out what happens when it comes to the date. Do appreciate it. Nigel Farage, you can find him on GB News, which is available on the Flash app here in Australia or on YouTube as well. Quick break, back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Thanks for watching tonight. Megyn Kelly tomorrow night. Lots more on Donald Trump throughout the night here on Sky News, and here comes the late debate.